Hello everyone and welcome to Starts at 60's newest online masterclass. I'm Rebecca Wilson, your host today and the founder and CEO of Starts at 60. Startsat60.com is the home of the Australian baby boomer. We've got media, travel and insurance offers for you, plus a marketplace full of carefully chosen products and a great membership platform that gives you access to exclusive information and better deals. To do that, we work with partners who also really care about older Australians to provide information, products and services you value. Today's masterclass has been created in partnership with Aveo, the provider of some of Australia's most desirable retirement communities, with 94 retirement and aged care communities across Australia. So if you're interested in downsizing to a retirement community, Aveo has property options well worth considering. I'd like to say a big thank you to Aveo for working with us on this. Now, before I introduce today's brilliant panel of experts and we kick things off, I wanted to let you know how the session will run. We have about 50 minutes of discussion with our panel, then about 10 minutes to answer your questions. We have the chat function running, so you can engage with other viewers while we're talking, and please be nice and respectful to each other. I know I shouldn't have to ask in this day and age, but the internet is the internet. We're not taking questions from the chat though, only those submitted via the Q&A. And that function is at the bottom of your screen. So type in your questions in there and we'll do our absolute best to get to them during our question and answer session. If we can't address all of your questions today, we'll follow up with the most pressing ones in articles on Starts at 60 over the coming week. It's just another reason to sign up for our email newsletters as a member. So to this wonderful panel we have with us today. We have Noel Whittaker, who probably doesn't need to be introduced to the Starts at 60 community. Noel is Australia's best known financial commentator, and he's just published a new book called Retirement Made Simple. It contains everything you need to know about retiring in today's changing world. So congratulations, Noel. I am guessing you've got another bestseller on your hands. Have you got a copy in front of you?
Thanks, Beck. I sure have. There you go.
Aha, beautiful. Now, another person who's very familiar to everyone at Starts at 60 is Rachel Lane. Rachel's the founder of Aged Care Gurus, where she oversees a national network of specialist advisors who are committed to providing great advice on downsizing, retirement living, and aged care. Noel and Rachel are longtime partners in crime. Their most recent book, Downsizing Made Simple, is just like Retirement Made Simple in that it's full of information that you can actually apply to real life. Thank you for that, Rach. So we're really excited to have the two of them here because they bring us that expert knowledge that we look to for that guidance independently. And then I'm super lucky to be able to introduce today Marilyn Graham, who's spent her career immersed in property. She's been a real estate agent, has worked with some of Brisbane's biggest property developers too on liaising with off-the-plan buyers of residential apartments. And she's Aveo's group sales manager. So she knows Aveo's properties like the back of her hands and is an expert in helping people choose the community that's right for their needs now and in the future and thinking about all those tricky things that come with it. So this panel is going to be a really massive help for us all to learn about this category, which is so often just not talked about in enough detail, in my opinion. So I'm sure everybody watching wants us to crack on with questions and answers from you guys. So let's get going. Noel, I'm going to start with you. You've just written a whole book about the considerations of today's pre-retirees and retirees have to make. So I'm sure you can tell us why nowadays we're talking about where you live as a part of the retirement planning conversation. It's probably not something retirees even a few decades ago even thought about because most people had much shorter retirements and they stayed in the same house until the end of their lives, right?
Well, basically, I mean, it's very changing time for retirement people because, first of all, they are living longer and living healthier. The government's pillars based on the fact that you have your family home and your superannuation cash in the bank. We are now at a 1,000-year low in interest rates, so money in the bank's no good. People really don't know how long they're going to live, so they tend to be restricting spending. So one of the major issues is, how can I make sure my money lasts as long as I do in retirement? Of course, the family home is one of the main things to that, because the family home for most people is their major asset, apart from super. And the way the age pension works, you can sell your family home and free up $400,000 and still get the age pension in full if there's no other asset. So I think the family home is going to be the biggest asset for most people going forward.
It is.
The thing about super, for many people, they're a little bit scared and uncertain of it. I mean, we've seen superannuation fund raise 8% if you're in the right option. How long your money's going to last? You still there? Sorry about that. I think my phone cut off.
Yes, I think we're having a little bit of trouble with your audio there, Noel. So I might just ask you to bring your device closer to you that's catching your Wi-Fi and see if we can help get the sound a little bit better. And just pop your phone next to your computer if you don't mind. I know your phone was on the other side of the room.
It's next to it now. It's next to it now.
Wonderful. Let's give it another shot, because I know a lot of people were commenting on the sound and saying, could we hear Noel again? Because they all love to hear you speak. So let's just go back and cover those points again. Sorry for everybody. We're working on a solution. So
is that better sound?
Noel, it's much better now, Noel.
Okay.
Take us back through those points, because I know we're living in an era where people live a much longer retirement and the world has changed. So people need to plan ahead a lot more than they ever have to.
The major worry people have is, will I live longer than my money? And superannuation returns can be uncertain, but the one certain thing is the family home. And basically you can downsize to a smaller house. If you free up $400,000 of cash and have no other financial assets, you can still get the full age pension. I think having $400,000 in the bank and the full pension is better than a much more expensive house with the full pension and no money in the bank. So,
Absolutely.
I think one of the main sources of equity for people will be the downsize. Absolutely.
In fact, the concept of downsizing and the different pillars of retirement are things that we would love to hear you talk about. And I'd love you to talk about those pillars again, if you don't mind, because we didn't hear all of the wonderful things you had to say before.
Well, the three basic assets that the government thinks about for people is the family home and their superannuation and other financial assets and the age pension. They're the three pillars. So one of the major elements of getting your finances right is to maximise your age pension and at the same time maximise the amount you can use on your house, often by downsizing. See, if you don't downsize, you into a reverse mortgage. And I regard a reverse mortgage on your house as very dangerous. So I think really it's downsizing is the best option for most people.
Right. Well, and it's not a suggestion everyone likes to hear, but when we talk, we report on the third pillar concept. Some Starts at 60 members get pretty angry, but it sounds like what you're saying, Noel, is that anyone coming up to or in retirement now has to give some thought to the property they own, simply because their home may need to provide them with the retirement income or the funding for some kind of aged care or home support in the future. But if that does become the case, what options do retirees have for releasing money from their primary residence? Is it the only way they can do it?
Well, the first one is downsize. There are some schemes you can sell a part share of your house, but I think that's tricky. I mean, what if you want to do a renovation? What if you want to change something? That's restrictive. And the third way is a reverse mortgage, where you take out a debt against your home, make no repayments of any sort, About every 10 years, that debt doubles. So you're facing the doubling debt. So I think for most people, the downsizing is the most practical and the safest option. Also, you know, if you're in a big old house, they cost a lot of money. You always said the old Scottish proverb, a wee house has a big mouth. Yeah, so, you know, when I'm in a big old house, it costs a lot of money to live in a big old house.
Yeah, well, that's something I think a lot of people can relate to. Downsizing, as Noel mentioned, Rachel, that can really impact your age pension entitlement, can't it? And I know that for many people, that's a big consideration of their downsizing decision-making process. It's why we want you guys to talk today, is to give us all that insight into how we can have the best of everything.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think sometimes people don't understand the logic that goes with maintaining pension entitlement, or they think that pensioners are too sensitive about losing their pension. But in reality, so if we just wind the clock back a little bit to the 1st of January 2017, that's when we got the new asset test. So what they said was, we'll allow you to have more assets and still get the full pension. But once you go over our new asset test thresholds, we'll double the rate at which the pension reduces. So what they did is they increased what they call the asset test taper from $1.50 per thousand per fortnight to $3 per thousand per fortnight. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you put that exact same equation in another way, if I say to you, well, you'll lose $7,800 a year of pension for every $100,000 you go over the asset test threshold, you realise quickly that those assets would need to earn you 7.8% just to replace the pension that you're losing. And in the current interest rate environment, like Noel said, that's a very difficult, if not impossible thing for a lot of people to do.
So we want to keep that pension in our pocket if we can. Noel, you mentioned before that freeing up home equity through downsizing means you can use it to contribute to your super or increase your income in other ways. But that surely has another set of impacts on the pension as well. Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, you can't use the downsizing rules until you reach pensionable age. I mean, until pensionable age, money in superannuation doesn't count for Centrelink, which can be very effective if, say, one partner's 66 and one's 56. But they won't let you use the downsizing rules until you're pensionable age, which therefore means you don't shelter it from the age pension rules by downsizing. So the downsizing into super is of no practical use except to let you get money into super. Of course, a lot of people having money in super, I think they would get a better rate of return in super than trying to do it themselves. But there's now products out, and they're called lifetime income streams, and only 60% of what you put in that product counts for Centrelink. So if you put $200,000 into one of these income streams, straight away, $80,000 ceases to be counted. That's worth about $7,000 in pension for you. So if you take up one of these streams, you get the income from the stream and also a big pension boost. It's one of these things that you really need special. What's that?
And you can downsize all in one go. You get all those benefits all in one go. Of
course, but you need specialist advice to make sure you do it right.
Yeah.
It's always good to take advice before the fact and not after.
That's why we have all this wisdom in the room with us today.
Absolutely.
I want to jump quickly to Marilyn now, just to ask if the money aspect is one of the big issues that potential buyers are thinking about when they talk to you about joining an Aveo community.
Yeah, obviously it's one of the critical peace of mind factors for them to know the financial construct of how it's going to look for their future. But it's not the only thing, certainly. So, you know, we often have the triggers of isolation, loneliness, health triggers and that sort of thing that is actually their driving motivation. And the financials just need to make sense to them along the way and make sure that that's nice and safe and secure for them. But there's so many other things that they're considering, how they can age in place, how they can downsize appropriately and make sure that that's the right place for them to be for the future. So as Noel said, you know, maintaining a large family home is one of our biggest issues for them as they age. So just the benefit of that alone can be enough.
Yeah, I can imagine. They're great points, Marilyn. I'm hoping you can address something that's connected to the idea of a safe community. A perception that some people have about retirement living is that villages are full of elderly people who may be more likely to get ill in a time like we're in now. But is that a fair view?
There's probably two different conversations there. So one is that perception that we're actually full of older people. And I think it's really important whenever you go and visit a community, whether you're visiting friends in there or you're actually coming to look at it for your own purposes, that you understand people are there to age in place. So some of those facilities and amenities that are in the community that you tour are being used by the people who actually need them at the time. The independent living people are still out and about living the lives as they would have done in their own homes. They're sitting on boards, they're going to visit grandkids, all of that sort of thing. So it's really important that you experience the community at different times. And then when we look at the current circumstance and the year that we've had, it's actually been, I know that's been a fear out there, but the communities themselves, we've done a lot of work underneath government and health directives, of course, around protocols to make sure the residents are keeping safe. But what we've also done is make sure they've stayed connected. So that feeling of isolation of people outside in their homes on their own, we've had so many different events, from balcony music parties to street happy hours to hallway happy hours. The Brisbane exhibition was cancelled, so one of our villages had a full Eka day complete with dog show and strawberry sundaes. So it's actually been a really positive experience for as positive as it could be anyway, and very safe. So
I know in my area there's a beautiful new vertical community that I know of and have even done a tour of. I feel very lucky. It's a beautiful facility, but they had because all the residents were able to come out on their balconies in the heart of lockdown in Queensland, and there was bands appropriate playing in the car park for all of the residents. It was I saw the call outs on Facebook asking for bands and appropriate musicians to play, and lots of people tipping off each other on who would play.
Yes.
And things like that. So it was a real community vibe, everybody jumping in together, and the community managers being very active during the time. It was great to see.
I'll make a comment, Becky.
Yeah, please.
I think often people put off the move. And when they put the move off, the house gets older, and all of a sudden you can reach a stage you can't sell the house without costly maintenance. Where you reach a stage where they don't want to go, and then they reach a stage, well, one partner dies, and then the other partner, well, they don't want to go on their own. By moving earlier rather than later, I think you'll get a better price for your home, and also you become part of the community. Then if one partner becomes ill or dies, the survivor has a network they can fall back on. There's nothing worse than a very old person alone in a crumbling home. It's just a terrible existence. So I think the move earlier rather than later, in many cases, is the way to go.
I know my parents downsized before they were 70, and after Dad got through to the end of it, he said he was so glad he did it at that age, because he got to the other side of it, and he said he would never have wanted to have to part with all the things and work through everything in a less healthy state, because it was just so much work to part with the furniture you've had and the big things, the really big things that don't go, and yet such a relieving process as well. He felt quite euphoric at parting with the 12-seat dining table, and things like that,
so
that are really no longer necessary, right?
Yeah.
Freshened up his new life. So I'm jumping off course though, and we have a really good plan for today. So let me make sure I cover everybody's questions. It's been a pretty uncertain time for all of us this year, and there's lots of uncertainties about retirement these days as well, as Noel pointed out. So the best thing anyone can do is plan as well as they can. Speaking of certainty, Rachel, we can't be sure the pension will remain the same forever. But if someone did move into an Aveo community, as an example, how would the pension be impacted as things stand today?
Okay, so, and we might want to go back to those slides that we had before. Thanks very much. So the first thing to think about is how much pension you're going to get. And the pension gets calculated under an asset test and an income test. as a general rule, and those of you who've read my articles on Starts at 60, you'll know that I call these, the Rottweiler and the Chihuahua. So the income test is the Chihuahua. That will bite you first, but it won't bite you as hard. The asset test is the Rottweiler. He's sitting on the front veranda and doesn't get up as quickly, but when he bites you a lot harder. So the aim of the game when it comes to maximising pension entitlement is to get those two tests as close as possible. Because if you get no pension under the asset test, for example, it doesn't matter that you're getting the full pension under the income test. They only pay whatever produces the least amount of pension entitlement. The amount that someone pays into a retirement village is also going to determine whether or not they're considered a homeowner, and by extension, whether or not they're eligible for rent assistance. So the current threshold for that is $214,500. If the amount that you pay is less than $214,500 for your unit, then you're considered to be a non-homeowner, and you can be eligible for rent assistance to help with the ongoing fees associated with the village. If the amount you pay is more than $214,500, then whatever you've paid for your unit is exempt as an asset because you're classed as a homeowner, but it does make you ineligible for rent assistance. So for those people, often that you can find, because sometimes people say, but where are you going to find a property for less than $214,500? But people who are considering serviced apartments and things like that, you can often find that there are properties in that price range, and that rent assistance, which is quite a generous payment. So once the amount of the ongoing fees exceed the threshold, rent assistance gets paid at 75 cents for every dollar you spend. So rent assistance can be quite generous, and you can see there that the maximum payments are about $140 a fortnight if you're a single, and $132 roughly for a couple, but it does depend on how much rent you pay. So that's why I've put how much rent you need to be paying to get that maximum payment, and all of those figures are fortnightly. So if you're getting the full age pension, let's say as a single person, that's $944.30 at the moment, then you can add an extra $140 on the top roughly if you're eligible for the full rent assistance. So it can be quite beneficial for people who are living on a fairly fixed income.
Yeah, right. So, and my next question is for Marilyn. So some retirement villages can be pretty financially advantageous when it comes to the age pension. But what about the cost of healthcare as you get older, Marilyn? I believe Aveo has a solution for in-home care that can help maximise any home care subsidies as well, if a resident receives their subsidies from My Aged Care.
Sure. So I think anyone on the call, and I think Rachel and Noel would certainly back me up, that's been through the My Aged Care system or understands how difficult it is to work with ACAT, etc., will understand the benefit of a team of people that it's available to you at any of our villages that can actually guide you through that process. And the ability of just the staff themselves to be able to pick up on things where you don't think you need support, but there may be some funding and support packages that are available to you that you're unaware of, and can guide you through that process, and then actually make sure that you're maximising the value out of it. So utilising the on-site care team, or you can bring at-home care into any village of your own choice, but just maximising that value and making sure that you're getting the support you need through people that are actually on site seeing you every day is inherent in our villages. So big benefit to the residents.
Oh, it is. I think people want to move into one of these communities as a place where they know they can stay fairly independent, don't they? And this helps the independents stay there as long as possible. And accessing all the government funding that's available is something that's very high priority for everybody. I mean, Rachel's made a whole stream of different advisors all around the country that can help people understand it. It's so complex. So yes, the next question is for Noel. From what you were saying earlier, home care and aged care are going to become pretty big topics for Australia in the coming years, as we're seeing in the media. What do you suggest in your book that readers think about when looking not at home care but at residential aged care? Is it something everybody should plan for?
I think really this is an answer for Rachel. I think that's more her field than mine. I mean,
okay.
Okay, I'm happy to answer that if you're happy for me to answer, Beck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course.
Look, I think I think the media do a great job of perpetuating a couple of myths when it comes to aged care. One is that if you ever need aged care, you're going to have to move into a nursing home. And the second myth is that once you get there, it's dreadful. They're kind of the two messages that the media give everybody when it comes to aged care. And neither of those two things are true, by the way. So at the moment, more than 1.3 million people access aged care services, and about 200,000 live in a residential aged care facility. So the overwhelming majority of people, more than 1 million people, are receiving aged care services in their own home. The question becomes, and it comes back to what Noel was talking about earlier, the question becomes, where's home? And what a lot of people find is that the family home is not a conducive place to receive care, and the modifications that are necessary in order to get care in the home can be either really expensive or simply not possible. So because you can start needing to widen doorways, replace steps with ramps, there can be a whole bunch of things that you need to be able to do to access certain parts of your home and to make it safe and all of those sorts of things as well. So I think that's important to understand. And coming back to what Marilyn was saying about care communities can offer a lot of benefits. Obviously, you've got a community setting that is built with the idea that people are going to age in place. So the wide doorways and all of those things were already considered before they built the buildings and developed as a general rule. And then you've got what I call the care infrastructure. So you've got the emergency call bells, you've got even just support things. Sometimes it might be a husband and wife and one person needs care, the other person doesn't, but you still need support for the carer. And so things that support the carer, like meals, for example, you wouldn't consider meals care, but they really can take pressure off that carer who is running themselves ragged with appointments and all the other things that they've got to do. And having a team of people on site who can prepare meals for them and take that off their list of things to do can really help. Or they might do a linen change, so they change the sheets and change the towels and put on fresh ones, and perhaps do a clean of bathrooms and kitchens and carpets and all of those sorts of things. And that can really be enormous support and enable a couple to stay together in, I guess, what people would call independent living, but it's kind of supported independent living. So those care and services are there, and you've got that respect of your privacy. You can close your door and know that no one's coming in, but at the same time, you can dial up the services and, if need be, the care that's coming into that apartment or that unit as you need to. And that I think is really where the baby boomers are kind of setting their expectations for care. They're very much saying, look, I want to maintain my independence and do the things that either I want to do or I can do, and sometimes they're not the same. Sometimes you can do it and you just don't want to, for myself. And then I want to know that there are care services, whatever it might be, that I can quickly and easily and cost efficiently get brought into my home to help me to maintain that independence and do the things and spend time doing the things that I want to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I've seen so much of it over the years here in people wanting their independence desperately, but needing support at the same time. And it's a very hard decision, but it's a very important one that we start talking about more, because I think previous generations saw aged care very negatively and had horrible experiences. And, you know, it's not the world we live in now, aging in place, it's totally different.
Yeah, it is. And it's becoming this very very blurred spectrum. And sometimes, I've seen at conferences, other presenters play a game of spot the nursing home, and they put up these photos, and they say, okay, have a look at this. Now, is this a nursing home, a 5-star hotel, or a retirement village? You can't tell. Honestly, I see these, unless it's a property that I'm familiar with, I see these things and I go, I'm actually not too sure. They're really blurring the lines between what is aged care, what is retirement living, and what is 5-star hotel. Yeah.
Because increasingly people want to be able to call on the services available as they move into a housing choice. It's that really beautiful blurring of the lines between the services availability and choice. And it's nice to know that the government funding can really step in as well to play a role in it, so that no matter where you live.
Well, and you get such great bargaining power. I mean, I know we talk about money, but you really do get great bargaining power. If you've got an audience of 450 people all in the same spot, who majority of which would like to use the same service, the economies of scale on that are fantastic. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about haircuts or, you know, care. The economies of scale are really impressive. So the bargaining power that these retirement communities have in negotiating for those things can be pretty impressive.
And then you put the 94 villages that Aveo has into one, and they have that incredible community power to look after people. I think it's impressive. Now, I am going to jump us to the next question, because we're on a pathway to answer everybody's questions today, and more have been reaming in while we've been talking. People in the Q&A section there have been popping up questions all the time. So now, Marilyn, I'm going to ask you, in response to what Rachel talked about just now, Aveo has a lot of support, care requirements, and housing, I guess, is the piece we want to talk about as well. So what are the advantages to the way Aveo addresses this for older Australians that's different?
Look, I think it comes down to there's choice, and there's also peace of mind. So there's a couple of things to sort of talk about. A portfolio of communities range from independent living communities right through to residential aged care, and sort of everything in between. And something like our Freedom Care communities is where it kind of sits in between for people who are still looking to feel like they're living independently, live as a couple, have pets, all of those sort of things remain the same for them. But there's an additional bucket of care there available 24/7. So peace of mind for both the family, but the residents can still feel like they're very independent, doing their own thing, but have that support as they need it. And the advantage of our portfolio being the size that it is, I guess, and the fact that we own and operate all of those different care divisions allows for one of our contract choices to give people some of the freedom to move through those communities if they need to. So if there is a change in lifestyle or healthcare needs, we can sort of move them to a more suitable community should the need arise for that. And again, offering that sort of peace of mind, as well as, you know, if the time does come where they do need to move to care in an aged care capacity, you know, we've got those guaranteed buybacks in place in our contracts, which sort of facilitate the release of those funds as needed for further care needs.
I know from talking to the Aveo team over many years that there's options in place for people to move between an independent living unit and then into a service department or care over the years, and that it's not penalised. You're not effectively moving communities, you're staying within a community, or you can even move location if you need as well. If your children are closer to another area, your contracts actually take in the ability to relocate if you need to be closer to a family, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. And so that initial contract that you've signed and the initial, and I think Rachel's about to talk about ingoing contribution versus exit fees as such. So that part of the transaction is actually protected for you as you move through different communities. So rather than leaving one and then re-entering into a new unit, we just pick that up and take that with you as you need to progress. And again, yeah, that can be moving into state closer to family or moving to a community that might facilitate a bit more care for you.
Yeah, right. Well, now I'm going to turn to Rachel on this issue because she's got lots to say about these topics. It's one of the big stumbling blocks for people who might want to consider what a retirement village has to offer. They're nervous about what it'll cost, that it may cost more if they change community or don't like the community when they get there, or, you know, everybody hears a story and they believe it, and not always are the stories any more than urban myth, right? Just like in the school community of my daughter or anywhere else, they're half urban myth. Can you explain how exit fees work and how all of this sort of ties together?
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, and you're right. Most people look at the exit fee in isolation and they just decide, oh, that's a rip-off. And you've got to look at the transaction in total. So when you move into a retirement village, you pay an ingoing amount, sometimes called an ingoing contribution or an entry contribution or a purchase price. And that amount is typically kept artificially low by the retirement community operator. They want to keep it low because they want to make it affordable, and they want to enable residents and prospective residents to free up that money that Noel was talking about, whether it's 400,000, 100,000, whatever it is. They're wanting people to be able to downsize financially. So they keep that price low, and then ongoing, they charge a fee generally called a general service charge or a recurrent charge. And they do that on a cost recovery basis. So whatever it costs them to run the village, they then apportion those costs, whether it's based on the size of your unit or how many people are living there. They apportion those costs across the village, and then there's no profit in that. So if they haven't made a profit from what you've paid up front, and they haven't made a profit from the fees that you're paying every month, every year while you live there, then it makes sense that they make up for those two things at the end. And that is what the exit fee is about. It's about compensating the operator for those two things, for operating the village at cost and for not charging the full price up front. Sometimes
they have to run a business.
Yeah, that's right. And there's so many different ways in which that exit fee can be calculated. So sometimes very simple models like Aveo's model work on a percentage of the purchase price. So it's very simple. You know exactly how much you're going to pay before you even move in, because it's a percentage of what you're planning to buy your unit for. You don't have to worry about shares of capital gain, shares of capital loss, renovation costs, selling costs, administration fees, all of those things. And then to provide extra certainty, like Marilyn was touching on before, they have both what I call move-in guarantees and move-out guarantees, so that you can literally, within, depending on which contract you take, within 6 months of moving in, you can hand back the keys and say, look, this isn't what I thought it was, and they're not going to charge you an exit fee. And likewise at the end, even though the legislation might state that you're entitled to a buyback after 18 months, then depending on which contract you choose, you might be entitled to a buyback after 6 months. Now, and that can be really valuable if you're moving into residential aged care, because if you need that money to fund your accommodation deposit to the aged care facility, but you can't get access to it for an extra year, then, you know, on $400,000, let's say, that you're waiting on, that could cost you $16,000 of interest to the aged care facility. So that can be a really valuable feature, being able to get a hold of that money sooner than what perhaps the retirement village down the road might be offering you. So there's an exercise, and everyone who's listening to this webinar is welcome to have it. It's what I call the ingoing, the ongoing, and the outgoing. And we can send you this as a much sexier PDF and give you instructions on how to do that. But definitely think about your upfront costs, your ongoing costs, and your outgoing costs. And if you're looking at one village versus another village, then you can put these things side by side, because different villages will charge different amounts. And sometimes people get hung up with rules of thumb that really don't serve them very well. So sometimes they get hung up with, well, the purchase price in this retirement village is 500,000. The purchase price in that retirement village is 400,000. That one's cheaper. And it's kind of like the wise teenagers say, well, yeah, but nah, right? So yes, it is a lower purchase price, but you need to think about, what are you going to pay while you live there? How much are you going to get back, and when you leave? And the other thing to think about is, does paying the $500,000 versus the $400,000 mean you get an extra $7,800 a year of pension entitlement, because you would be affected by the asset test? So you've got to factor in everything and not just use really basic broad brush approaches. And like Noel said, specialist advice, so seeking out a retirement living and aged care specialist to get advice from, to crunch all the different numbers and make sure there's nothing that you've missed, and make sure that you understand exactly what it means that you won't have any nasty surprises down the track.
Yeah, look, I think that this little toolkit, it's in the Downsizing Made Simple book. There's a big explainer on it, isn't there?
Yeah, and
activity.
We're happy to give away. So, and we also have the downloads, and happy to make that available to anyone who wants it, because it really is such an important exercise for people to go through and just make sure that they understand exactly what they're going to pay, when and why.
Yeah, no, I love it. So just email us at money@startsatsixty.com and we'll email you back the little template. So once you've crunched the numbers, I assume it's all about the feel of a village. So Marilyn, do most buyers want to make a quick decision, or do they look at several villages before deciding if they want to buy? And how do they make those decisions?
Yeah, it's a complicated answer there. So when someone's come in for a trigger of some kind, then it can be a very quick decision because some of the decision-making ability is taken away from them. But generally speaking, it's really important that people take the time to understand the whole picture. So they're not just looking at financials. They're taking some time to look at, we've got everything from 30-year-old villages with historic buildings on site to beautiful brand new vertical living apartments in the city, from studios to 3 bedrooms with garages, with carports, etc. So what does downsizing look for them? How are they going to live? But importantly, understanding that living in that unit isn't living in the community. So living in the unit is where you've got your privacy and where you've got your peace and quiet and your personal things. But the facilities and amenities is where that's where the value add is. So if I'm going to think about entertaining my family at Christmas, what area of the village can I do that in? Are we going to utilise the restaurant? Are we going to be by the pool? Are we going to be in the bush, in the parklands? All that sort of thing. And what value does that provide me? Is that the lifestyle that I want? And also making sure they're your people. So feeling connected to that village. I sort of say to people, sometimes you walk into a village and your shoulders go down and you start breathing differently because the comfort is there automatically, and that's a really good thing when that happens because you know that it's fitting. But experience the community as often as you can in different ways. So if there's the possibility, hopefully in the not too distant future, of having events again, coming along to events, coming and meeting some residents, coming and meeting the community staff, to talk about what does a day in the village look like. Have a look at the activity calendars. See if you can participate in a couple of those activities along the way, just to make sure that all of those things fit together, not just the financials, because it is a huge decision. We want it to be where they stay. This is an age in place decision, and it's a big one. So yeah, absolutely coming in. And I think, that money back guarantee is a really important piece for people, along with peace of mind, because the 6 months should give them enough time to experience a couple of milestones. So whether that is Christmas and a birthday and a family celebration of some kind, to make sure that the community is giving them the lifestyle they want.
I've come and visited quite a few communities over my time and been to open days and things like that. And I absolutely love the diversity of communities that are available. In just the catchments around Brisbane, you can go out to Durack where it's a big sprawling sort of, it's a slightly older buildings, but they're ground level and all terraced into the hill, and the big water pool is out in the middle and everybody does their water aerobics and things like that. I can remember it vividly doing a visit with the community once, and yet in the middle of the city you've got these beautiful tall buildings with glamorous restaurants on the top floor, looking out across the whole Brisbane skyscape, and Carindale the same. The diversity is enormous, and the price points are enormously different as well for people. Clayfield is a historical village with, big homesteads and things like that. And I'm sure in every city it's a bit the same, isn't it?
It is. And, if you go to, any of the states, the same diversity appears. So whether you want apartment, villa, again, the size of the unit, the facilities, but again, generally people will be moving to within the community that they know, or they're moving close to family. So, location still applies. But again, making sure that it's giving you the lifestyle that you're actually wanting.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So I am, my screen just went blank. Isn't that terrible when that happens? Just a minute while I'm sorry about that. It's just one of those little bugs that happens every now and then. I'm back. My last question, the formal ones, is for Noel. Looking very carefully before you leap is something you always say to us when you're talking, as our mums and dads no doubt told us, but especially when contracts and money are involved. You've given your readers and listeners so much advice over the years. And before we move on to viewers' questions, can you share with us what other adage still rings true when it comes to planning for retirement?
Look, it's a multifaceted thing. I mean, one of the main things is estate planning. who will get your money when you go. There's things about superannuation. I mean, if you die and leave your superannuation to a non-dependent, there's death tax of 17%. You can get round the death tax by giving an enduring power of attorney authority when you get close to death to take all your superannuation out tax-free and put it in the bank account. There's just so many issues in this. I think one we haven't really touched upon is one of the major factors that determines happiness in retirement is the social network. That's one of the major things that keeps people healthy and happy. And I think that's why the village is so good, you know?
Absolutely.
Social network.
Very much the communities are the anchor, aren't they? As you change your, I guess it's not even the right word is purpose, but people find a new level of purpose and a new set of meanings. And I think the people around you are some of that.
But it's also, I mean, there's things that you must do. You don't go, if your kid's in business, don't go guarantor, you know? If you see an ad in the newspaper, financial product, think of Mayfair, think of Nant Whiskey, you know, that's a red flag. Any financial product endorsed by a prominent sportsman is about 10 red flags. You know, you need to be careful out there. Got examples in the book. We've had Mayfair, you know, Courtney and Nant Whiskey, a stack of them.
It's really good advice. I'm looking for 10 red flags for you now. You've got me on that one. I love it.
There's plenty of red flags.
Yes, isn't it?
Take advice before you do the deed. But the main thing is to take advice before you do things as well. Just don't rush in.
No, and that's something we always stand by. So now we're going to move on to our viewer questions. We've got a good stack of them, so I'm going to work through and throw them back and forth to each of you. This is a question we received from a viewer before our masterclass. Marilyn, they're asking you, what is Aveo's stance on alternative energy? In particular, can residents put solar panels on their roof?
Again, as if we look back to the previous comment on historical buildings versus vertical living versus all of that sort of thing. So where the roofing is appropriate for it and the buildings are structurally sound to accommodate that, they are able to do that. So it's working with the community management team, but you know, in vertical living communities, not so easy. But again, it's village by village. But if that's something that's important to you when you make the decision, then that's going to be a consideration when you're considering the property you're choosing.
Yeah, wonderful. I think the next one comes down to contracts. So Rachel, if you buy in a retirement village, are you the homeowner for age pension terms? And can you go over your points on that again?
Sure, absolutely. So whether or not you're a homeowner depends on how much you pay. So if you move into a retirement village and you pay less than $214,500, then you're not considered a homeowner. The amount that you've paid for your home is included in your pension assets, but there's no detriment because as a non-homeowner, you get an extra $214,500 in the asset test threshold. So there's no harm to you as a result of having it included. But the benefit of that is that you can then be eligible to get rent assistance based on the ongoing amount that you're paying to live in the village. If the reverse is true, so if you pay more than $214,500, you're a homeowner for pension purposes. So the normal rules apply. Your home is an exempt asset and you get the homeowner asset test threshold and you don't qualify for rent assistance.
All right. Another slightly related issue, Rachel. If your home in a retirement village is an investment you've made, why can you not sell it however you wish?
Typically, you can't make an investment in a home in a retirement village. So typically, retirement villages are owner occupied. And the reason is that they're trying to control who lives there because under the legislation will normally specify that the residents need to be at least 55 years of age. So most retirement village contracts will say that you must be an owner occupier. You can't rent your home out on Airbnb. You can't rent your home out on, realestate.com or any of those sorts of things. You must just occupy that home. When it comes to selling your unit in a retirement village, typically you can choose an external real estate agent to sell it. there's normally still an exit fee that gets applied. So sometimes people think that if they buy a retirement village in a strata title development, that somehow that will mean that there's no exit fee. And that's typically not the case. There is an exit fee, and normally what the operator would do is they would place a caveat or some other type of encumbrance on the title to make sure that firstly you don't sell it to somebody who doesn't meet the legislative criteria to live there, but secondly that the exit fee gets paid. So I guess it's, when it comes to your contract, and again, happy to make this this activity available, it's really important. Sometimes people look at it only through one lens, often the costs, but ultimately your contract serves three purposes in one. It's meant to be a balance of your rights, your responsibilities, and your costs. And you should really sit down and look at your contract through those three separate lenses. My advice would be do it one at a time. So go through the contract back to front, looking for all the rights that you've got. Go through it again, just looking at the responsibilities that you've got, and then go through it for the costs. And that way you'll be sure to understand exactly what that contract is about. Because sometimes people think that they want certain rights, for example. So they might really have a thing. A lot of people have a thing about capital gain. They subscribe to this theory that property goes up, always goes up, to which I say, yes, it does, except for when it doesn't. It's like any market, it goes up and it goes down. So
we only like to remember the ups.
Correct. And sometimes their life experience is that they bought a house and they held on to it for 30 or 40 or 50 years and it increased in value substantially, and they're referencing that. So, but sometimes people really look at contracts with capital gain more favourably than contracts that don't have capital gain. But what you're looking at in the right for capital gain needs to be balanced with the responsibilities and the costs. So typically, if you've got the right to either 100% or even 50% of the capital gain, you will need to meet the renovation costs associated with achieving that capital gain. You will need to meet selling and marketing expenses associated with selling the property. And because you're entitled to that capital gain, typically there won't be a short buyback period because the operator needs to give themselves time to find that new resident. So you may want capital gain, but you've got to think, are you happy to wear the cost of renovations, selling, and potentially getting your money back later rather than sooner, all of which have a cost attached to them and a responsibility attached to them. So it's really
a huge benefit to the consumer if they've chosen to be able to later in life not have to wait to sell a property or maintain a property. And I think that's something people forget, is that they might be selling this property when they're 85 or 90 or not even alive. And at that point, people don't want to spend 18 months doing it.
And those renovation costs can be $2,000 and they can be $52,000. It's going to depend on how long you've lived in the village. If you've lived in the village for a long time, then you're probably going to need to do a new bathroom, a new kitchen, new carpets, new curtains, and it's not a cheap exercise. And it's probably not something that you really want to have to deal with at that particular point in time. So all I'm saying is just look at your contract through the three different lenses and make sure that it marries with what you expect to have happen at that point in time.
So, it really does constitute a different stage of where people previously expected your property to be an investment. Even if you're living in it as a primary residence, in the same way that many people buy a property that they live in and they're hoping to receive a capital gain on, we're heading into a different era where they're thinking of their retirement village property as this is a different stage. It's an
investment in lifestyle. Yeah. It's like buying the new whiz-bang caravan, or it's like buying a boat, or it's like buying, a sports car. It's a lifestyle investment that you're making. You're making this investment to get the lifestyle that it can offer you. If you are buying into a retirement village in an attempt to make money, there are far better things that you should be investing your money into, especially if you think you're going to buy into a retirement village and then not live there. Like that's just not a very well thought out plan.
Right. My next question's for Marilyn. Does moving into a retirement village mean home maintenance? Anything from changing light bulbs to doing the gardening? is done by a village provider such as Aveo. Tell us about how the maintenance fee paid works and what are the residents responsible for?
So generally speaking, within our contracts, and this is Rachel just mentioned about rights and responsibilities in the contractual side of it, all the external parts of units are generally maintained and repaired by the operator, so by Aveo. You'll have an on-site maintenance team. So within your unit, in the inside walls, it's your home. So if you want to repaint, if you want to do all of that sort of thing, that is up to you. Generally speaking, if something needs to be replaced, that is at the cost of the operator. But the general maintenance and repairs as you live there would be the responsibility of the resident. Having said that, there's an on-site team that can come and help out, generally speaking, and make that a lot easier than it might be in your own home. And again, if there's anything that's major, that will be sort of with the operator. So
that's a nice relief for everybody to know how it all works. Yet another question for Aveo. Marilyn, is it possible to purchase furnished units in an Aveo community? And the viewer asks, can I have carers from an external agency visit me at an Aveo community?
So we don't sell furnished units. We have obviously beautiful displays where you can pitch your furniture, and we do sometimes have people ask if they can buy said display furniture. But generally, it's your home, so you're bringing in your own pieces and making it the way you want it to be. So we can arrange that for you, or you can choose your own and do your own thing. And yes, you are absolutely more than welcome to bring in your own care providers into the village, as you would do into your own home.
Yeah, that's wonderful for people to know. So this is a complex question. So this one I'm going to ask Marilyn first, then Rachel can jump into if you've got additional information, because I think this may possibly be different depending on what state or territory you're in.
Yep.
Who makes the decision that a person needs more care than can be delivered to their home, so has to move to residential aged care? For example, can Aveo decide that a resident isn't capable of living in their own home in a retirement village, or is it something that a resident decides?
So again, contractually, there's some duty of care sort of stuff in our contracts, but state by state legislation is pretty good as far as protecting the residents. What people need to understand from an operator point of view is that not everybody in our village is going to have some family or support network that assists them through that process. So sometimes the operator may need to step in and assist with those decisions. But we do not have the ability to force a move. And I think Rachel, I'll throw to you. Getting into aged care is not a decision that anyone other than a medical practitioner sort of makes. So somebody is going to tell you that you need aged care. Nobody makes that choice for you.
Yeah, right. Rachel, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so typically if a retirement village, and this is not specifically talking about Aveo, it's just talking about people moving from retirement villages into aged care in general. Typically if the retirement village don't think someone can stay in the village safely, they will ask for an ACAT assessment, so an aged care assessment team assessment to be carried out, and for a medical professional to determine whether or not it is safe, because really it's not the operator's call. They can't decide whether it's safe or whether it's not safe. So if they've got concerns, then they will want a medical professional's opinion about whether or not it's safe or not safe. And there's normally a process that you can go through. So even if the medical professional says they think it would be best for you to move into residential aged care, there's still a process that you can go through to say that medical professional's opinion is not right. And say, well, no, I can, and these are the support services, and you can go through a process of saying, well, I can and prove that you can live there safely.
Yeah, okay. My next one's for, it's another related question specific to Aveo. Can you please take this one, Marilyn? A viewer asks, if I need to transfer from an Aveo community to some kind of Aveo provided aged care facility, are there costs involved in transferring?
Yeah, so aged care is funded completely differently to retirement villages. So the aged care is all means tested. It all happens through Centrelink as to how you actually pay for that care. It's probably its own masterclass, to be honest. Yes, there is no facility for us to accommodate that payment any faster than your normal exit out of your unit. So when it's an Aveo owned facility, we can certainly assist with the application process and the move in, but the financial models need to move from one source of funding to another as they would in any other environment.
Okay, that's good.
It's a very complicated.
Maybe we can set up one of those masterclasses for early next year.
Yeah.
It sounds interesting. And Noel, the next one's for you. A viewer wants to hear again your points on how to make the best use of any money released from downsizing so that it doesn't impact the pension. And did you say you can have $400,000 and still get the full pension?
But $400,000 in total assets. That does include your furniture and your car, but they should be valued at, second-hand value and red book value. But you can have $400,000 in total assets, but you can write your other ones down to 10. So say just under $400,000, you can get the full pension as a couple. If you're in excess of that, you can look at some of those lifetime income streams where only 60% counts. So every $100,000 that you put in there gives you another almost $4 a week in pension, plus the income from that. So there's many things to do. There's all sorts of options. You can invest in funeral bonds, give some money away. So you really need to look at your fees and optimise them.
And get some advice.
There's so many things. I mean, it's a bit silly to just go on a boat cruise and spend $100,000 to get $8,000 in pension. It would take you 13 years to get that back. So just don't spend in a silly way just to get the pension.
Yeah, right. Okay, well that's a great answer. This question isn't about the standard situations, Marilyn. This viewer wrote to us as a self-funded retiree. I'm concerned about my retirement funds running out in 20 years' time, leaving me not able to cover the ongoing fees of living in a retirement village. So I'm wondering if it's possible within the retirement village model for the village provider to deduct money from the value of the property to cover fees such as the maintenance fee while I'm still in residence, which the provider would recoup when I leave the properties and it's sold. Or can I use a reverse mortgage on a retirement village property?
Well, the easy answer on the reverse mortgage is no, generally, because it's a leasehold contract, so they're not available in the retirement village contracts. But look, we do have, our community managers work with our residents on a day-to-day basis to make sure that everything is comfortable. And we certainly encounter times of, higher costs where there's been an immediate care need or a hospital stay or that sort of thing, where we may need some relief on fees for a set period of time. So village by village, individual by individual, there are facilities in place to assist with that. Nothing formal, but we would always work with the independent resident to work that issue through.
Okay, we're going to run slightly over time. Just everybody, there's a lot of people out there they're still watching, and I've got a few more questions on my screen, everybody, so stick with us. I'll try and get us through them in like 5 minutes, but everybody's enjoying it and just keep on feeding, they've kept on feeding questions in for you. So Rachel, this is something we've talked about in previous masterclasses. Can you explain the difference between a retirement village and a land lease community?
Sure. So Marilyn just touched on that the retirement village contracts are normally leasehold arrangements. In and there's lots of different contract forms that you can get in retirement villages, but leasehold and license arrangement are certainly the most common. In a land lease community, you purchase the home, so you actually own the home, but the leasehold arrangement is over the land on which the home sits. So that's what makes you a homeowner and a tenant at exactly the same time. Whereas a retirement village contract, your leasehold is over both the dwelling that you occupy as well as the community facilities and all of those sorts of things. And it's typically registered on the operator's title.
Okay, thank you for that. Our viewer is keen to know, Marilyn, does Aveo share or retain any capital gains that might be made on the sale of a property in an Aveo community?
Yes, we do. So the contracts that we offer were based on, the market demanding some simplicity and things like that. So yes, well, we also cover all of the costs of the resale of the unit. So whether it needs, as Rachel said, a $2,000 or a $52,000 refurbishment in order to make it saleable, that is at our cost. All of the selling costs, all of the marketing costs for the property are also covered by us. And yes, we do capture 100% cap gain on our contracts.
Okay, thank you very much. Rachel, one for you again. Sorry, actually, I've jumped.
Yep.
Yes, I have. I've got one more for you, Rachel. Can you go over the advantages and disadvantages of purchasing a retirement village on a deferred management fee structure versus a strata structure?
Ooh, okay.
Good luck.
Okay. So I'll be upfront and say strata is possibly my least preferred contract type when it comes to retirement villages. And the simple reason is because of the responsibility that the residents have. So in strata, because the residents own their units, they must be part of the body corporate, or what's now often called an owner's corporation. You don't have a choice. You must, as an owner, you must be part of that, and you must be involved in the ongoing management of the village. And that may not be an issue on the day you move in, but as you age in place, it may be something that becomes too much. I've seen a lot of strata villages become quite nasty, where residents fight with each other about how the village should be managed. In Queensland, the buyback laws have placed a number of strata title villages into fairly precarious financial circumstances because the owner's corporation is responsible for the buybacks, which basically means that if a unit in that retirement village doesn't sell within the guaranteed buyback time, potentially the other residents need to buy that unit back, which they probably can't afford to do, and they would then need to go to QCAT and make an application for financial hardship to say that they can't do it. So I think most people perceive advantages in strata title in terms of they perceive that there's no exit fee, they perceive that they have more rights, and they definitely do have more rights. In some cases, you can get a reverse mortgage against a strata titled retirement village unit. But you've got to weigh that up against what are your responsibilities. So you've got the responsibility to be involved in the day-to-day management through the owner's corporation. You've got responsibilities. So when Marilyn was talking before about Aveo villages that operate on a leasehold, and Aveo are responsible, for example, for everything outside your unit, it doesn't work like that if it's strata title. So if you've got a communal swimming pool, for example, that's the responsibility of the owner's corporation. Something goes wrong with that swimming pool, then the owner's corporation need to meet that cost. If there's not enough money in the monthly service charges, that have accumulated to do that, then there would be a special levy across the residents to meet that. And we've certainly seen issues with, building defects and things like that can mean that those special levies can be in the thousands, sometimes even the tens of thousands of dollars. So you've really got to weigh up, it comes back to that rights, responsibilities and costs. You've really got to weigh up, what does this contract offer you in terms of rights, responsibilities and costs? What does the other contract offer you in terms of rights, responsibility, and what matches with what you expect to have happen, not just on the day you move in, but for as long as you live there and after you leave.
That's a really good snapshot. I think people increasingly want certainty at this time of life, don't they? Not necessarily all those things that can go wrong anymore that we have in the big houses, don't we, Noel?
That's right. And I think sometimes people get really hung up about this capital gain stuff, and they might look at it and they say, oh, well, XYZ operator, they're going to give me 100% of the capital gain, or they're going to give me 50% of the capital gain. And I say, okay, and that's great, assuming everything goes well, but how much of the capital loss are they going to give you? Because in some contracts, you get half of the capital gain, but you get 100% of the capital loss. So, you've got to weigh these things up and just make sure that if things aren't necessarily going exactly as you planned, what does that look like? Because I think we all have that eternal optimist in us, and sometimes you just need to consult the more practical side and go, okay, and if the worst was to happen, what does that look like?
That's really helpful advice. I've got one more that's popped in while you were talking just then, Rachel, a really important one. Do retirement villages typically charge to pass their contract to you for citing prior to you signing such a document?
No, I've never heard of that. Sometimes there can be fees when it comes to the ingoing bucket. Sometimes there can be fees to have your contract prepared. have your leasehold registered on the operator's title, things of that nature. But I've never heard of a retirement village charging you to look at the contract. And I think if you're asking that question, that's a fantastic question to ask, and that's a fantastic thing to do. If you're looking at a retirement village, get a copy of the contract nice and early. And most retirement village contracts, actually, they can't let you sign within a certain amount of time. So there's sort of a consideration period, so that you can't have a situation where you go in, you fall in love with it, you sign without really understanding what you're signing, and then realise, 5 years later or whatever it might be. So I've never heard of a retirement village withholding that sort of information. There's all sorts of disclosure requirements that they've got.
Excellent. And the last question, a viewer asks, Marilyn, what are the rules in an Aveo community on having overnight guests or guests if they stay longer, such as grandkids?
So guests are very welcome. So the restriction, I think there is, in most villages, it's up to a month for one person to stay with you. And the only thing that we request is that you notify the staff of the village, just in case, if there is any kind of emergency and evacuation. It's a safety measure. We know who's in the unit and who's not. And generally speaking, the resident does need to be there with them. So, yeah.
Well, look, that is very helpful insight. Now, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but the video for this event will be live on starts60.com really soon if you'd like to listen to it in more detail or you missed any of the detail. And you'll see follow-up stories on our site, on Facebook, and on our email newsletters. In the meantime, I'd like to thank our fantastic panel. Wave your books, guys, while you're there. These guys are experts in their field, and that's why we invited them on. And Marilyn is the expert on what the Aveo communities bring nationally. So it is a privilege to have their advice with us today. And of course, I'd also like to thank Aveo, Australia's leading and most innovative senior living provider. You can find out more about them at aveo.com.au. Please take a look. That's aveo.com.au. And please, everyone, take care, stay healthy, and we hope to see you all again soon for another Starts at 60 masterclass.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.